Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the wild, wacky, weird, and yet wonderful world of the Word. Yep, that time when we take a second look and say, "What? What's that all about?" Because, you know, studying the Bible can be a mysterious enterprise. It can be mystifying. It can be almost just plain defying. I don't know what else to say because it it's not easy. Let's put it that way. We have our English translations, and you think that they just kind of floated down out of heaven and all is well and fine. No, no, no. It's taking a lot of energy and effort and struggle on the part of scholars to come up with any of the translations that we have today because you're working through multiple languages. You're working through Hebrew, you're working through Greek, you're working through Aramaic, you're working through a lot of script that was in Latin, and then you're trying to make it relevant for us today in our English language. And how about other places in the world? How about Spanish? And how about French? And how about Chinese? And, come on. It's not an easy task. And part of what we're going to talk about today centers on the prophet Jeremiah. That's one of our lessons that we have for this coming Sunday. And what's kind of interesting about Jeremiah is that when you look at it and you start flipping through it, it's got a lot of chapters there, 50 some chapters. You'll see some of it's written in poetry form and some of it's just plain old prose. And it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you begin to say, couldn't he make up his mind? And what is that? Well, scholars have tinkered with it and analyzed it and put it under the microscope, trying to figure out what's going on. And what they've come up with is a hypothesis that basically says when you look at the poetry part, that was something that Jeremiah directly said, or one of his disciples was close by and was able to take it down verbatim, dictation style. So you have that. And then the prose parts, as they looked at it and kind of picked it apart, they noticed there was a bit of a difference between that and the poetry parts, although even the prose parts differed from beginning to end. And it showed an influence of copyists or editors who made different changes here and there. Probably to just try to make it more relevant for their day. Now, how do we know that it may well be the case? And don't go into thinking all of a sudden, oh man, that ruins the book of Jeremiah now, because we believe that God inspired every word of Jeremiah. Well, God did inspire all the words of Jeremiah, but it doesn't mean that it was all there at once. It came through a process, a lengthy process. And you might ask me, well, how do we know that? Well, here's how we know it. Number one, the thing that really gets us deep into this rabbit hole of sorts when you're trying to uncover the secrets of Jeremiah is the Qumran scrolls. Yep, there when that shepherd boy in the 1940s was looking for his lost sheep and he throws a rock into a cave in the Qumran area of the Middle East, and here's something break, goes in and finds a jar, a clay jar that had scrolls in it. And then they looked at these ancient scrolls and said, wow, we just came upon something that's pretty important, the Qumran scrolls. And as we know, these have given us, with the exception of the book of Esther, every single book in our Older Testament is found in at least one copy, if not more, amongst the Qumran caves. Some books of the Bible have multiple copies. Some just have one or two, and some of them just have pieces that. And these all date back to the 2nd century BCE. They're the oldest preserved copies of Scripture that we now have. Isn't that amazing? That's incredible, and to have that much of our Bibles. But that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is sometimes it's not the same stuff that we have now. In fact, Jeremiah is a case in point. With what they have found, there are 5 different versions of the book of Jeremiah. Now, that doesn't mean they're completely different and way off, but there's 5 different ones that are found there. Now, here's the thing that's even more kind of mystifying and makes you want to scratch your head and say, wow, that's weird. About the same time, the entire Older Testament had been translated from the Hebrew into Greek. Why? Because the Seleucid Empire had risen and the Greeks were in control, and many of the people now spoke the common everyday Greek language. So they wanted something for worship, for their reading of the Scriptures, so they had the Scriptures translated into Greek. Well, what they found in the Qumran caves is that the Greek version of Jeremiah has verses in it and chapters in it that none of the other ancient Hebrew manuscripts have. And you go, wow, this is really getting crazy now. So who's right, who's wrong, blah, blah. Well, let's make a long story short. If you have a really good study Bible, you're probably going to have a lot of footnotes at the bottom of every page, because we try to understand how it was all put together, how it was edited through the ages. Jeremiah very likely was written during his time that he was preaching to the people of Judah and begging them to turn back to God. And he's often called the weeping prophet because what he sees is destruction. And it does happen. Finally, in 586, well, actually the first deportation to Babylon was 597. And then Nebuchadnezzar kind of backed off a little bit, but one of the puppet kings that were put into place by Nebuchadnezzar decided to rebel against him. And that was it. He just marches in and lays the whole city of Jerusalem to waste. 586, carries off a bunch of people in exile, kills a bunch of others, and others flee for their lives, including Jeremiah. Although Jeremiah went unwillingly. He was kind of bound up and carried off into Egypt with a bunch of people whom he kept begging, no, do not go to Egypt. Don't go to Egypt. They go to Egypt. What happens? We don't really know, but tradition says he was stoned to death down there by his own Jewish people who just had it with all his doomsday prophecies, saying, look at what you've done to us. They blamed him for the fall of Jerusalem. So, yeah, it gets kind of wild, gets kind of crazy and goofy. And here's even one other thing that's thrown into the mix. The Hebrew that is found in the Qumran scrolls is an ancient form of the Hebrew language that wasn't even in common use at the time of Jesus. Okay, right about there. This is stuff that was way, way old that many Hebrew scholars look at and say, wow, this stuff, this hadn't been around for a long time. So, all in all, the Qumran scrolls had a mix of this ancient Hebrew text. They had some Aramaic in there. There was a couple copies of Greek. It is an amazing discovery, and it's very helpful for us in looking at and pulling together what we have in Scripture. And I just want to put one final footnote in here. All these differences that they found do not significantly alter any of the message of the prophet Jeremiah. What you see is pretty much what you get and what the people of Judah and Israel got as well. Although the people of Israel were they were already gone at this point. They had been carried off by the Assyrians. So, wild, weird, wacky, oh yeah, but also wonderful. And day after day after day, we learn even more from those Qumran scrolls, as a lot of them haven't even been unrolled yet because they were in such a delicate position. They've come up with new ways and new technologies to actually see right through the scrolls and, and reproduce the text that is on them. Text that probably one day soon will be lost as they crumble into dust. But isn't it wonderful that we have preserved for us the, the words of these various prophets and biblical editors who through the ages worked on the text so that you and I can relive not only the past, but look at how God worked through the prophets for the people then, and how those words still ring meaning for us today. Blessings be with you, and enjoy your weekend.